Hi, my name is Kanal, and welcome to the Geeks of the Valley podcast, which connects with some of the brightest minds globally who are leading their respective industries today to discuss the hottest upcoming industry trends and how their work is affecting the global economy. What started off as a coffee chat has now grown into a global platform for visionaries. This morning, from Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam, we have the co founder of Homebase joining us. Homebase was founded in 2019 to give prospective buyers in Vietnam an alternative to traditional financing. Please welcome Phillip An. Phillip, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Grenal, it's good to be here. Very, very good in Vietnam. Things are, I think, looking very, very optimistic. So I was mentioning that actually starting like next week, and there's actually going to be they're actually going to let people in for international tourism after 2 years, basically. So I think people are very, very optimistic and very happy about the future of kind of what lies in store here. Yeah.
So, Phillip,
Yeah.
tell me about yourself and your background and how it led you to the path of starting Homebase, a YC backed company.
Awesome, man. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I'm not sure if you can tell by the accent, but I'm actually mainly from the U.S. and spent most of my time actually in Silicon Valley in San Francisco. So actually for myself, I had a technical background growing up. I studied computer science, but immediately after that, I was able to have the opportunity to try a lot of different interesting fields and professions per se. Everything from like management consulting to investment banking to venture capital to even product management. And I think over the past several years, having all of these kind of opportunities has really, really kind of led me to my entrepreneurial journey. I think it was being in Silicon Valley, seeing all of these other amazing people starting startups or starting companies, being in that space, being in that ecosystem, that kind of really inspired me to take the leap of faith and work on Homebase for the past several years. Yeah, happy to dive into like any of those experiences if you're curious.
So, Phillip, on the Homebase side,
Yes.
what is Homebase, Phillip, and what pushed you to start a company like Homebase in Vietnam?
Yeah. I mean, what Homebase does is we provide another path, an alternative path to home ownership for basically people in Southeast Asia, right? So it's, one of kind of the really meaningful impacts and mission statements that we're working on. But it's also at the confluence of real estate, technology, and also of finance as well. Yeah, and I think over the past several years, right, it was actually a lot of our personal experiences, my co-founders' personal experiences, talking to consumers and our own personal struggles, basically trying to buy real estate, in this part of the world, that really led to start this company, right? So, before my co-founder and I were, riffing on ideas, right? And, we had this conversation about, hey, what are some of the biggest problems that you face, right? We're big fans of YC, always have been. And, they really encourage you to think about solving the own problems that you face. And for him, one of the biggest problems is that, as an entrepreneur, as a startup person, it's just very hard to afford a traditional home loan, right? Partially because of very strict income requirements, but also real estate prices are just increasing really, really fast in the region. So in Vietnam, it's something like 20%, 22% every single year, right? So it's very hard for kind of a normal, even successful person to be able to buy a home, right, and have that path forward. So basically, it was kind of with that in mind that we decided to, embark on this mission of trying to solve one of the biggest problems that a lot of millennials and a lot of young people face here, right? Which is how do I be able to buy a home and how do I afford it with all of the rising prices and the really strict criteria for banks. So yeah, that's kind of what made us start the company, right? And I think over time, Homebase has really evolved from solving this core problem of how do we make home ownership more accessible to everyone, to even tackling other parts of the prop tech market. So, we've done other, models that include, iBuyer or other kind of very, very interesting prop tech models that we've seen very successful in the US and other parts of the world as well.
So, diving a bit deeper into this, when you say these other prop tech models, what type of models are these? What are we referring to here? Can you give some examples?
Yeah, yeah. So I think one of the core kind of models that we started to do, and especially during COVID, right, was this concept of an iBuyer, right? And fundamentally, what was the driver about of this is that during COVID, it's very hard to actually have a very strong appetite for home ownership, right? Because people are kind of very conservative with their money and they want to save up and all of that kind of stuff. So when we were talking to a lot of our consumers, right? What we realized is that actually people wanted to sell their real estate, right? And they wanted to basically unlock the cash from their home so that they can fund their businesses, they can feed their families, or save their businesses, basically, right? So, but what we saw, kind of the problem in the market, is that it was very hard for people to sell because there was no liquidity, right? Like there's not a lot of buyers in a COVID environment where everyone's trying to sell. And so, the kind of the biggest pain point that they faced was, hey, I really want to sell my property, but there's no buyers. Like, what do I do? I still need cash, right? So that's exactly what iBuyer does, right? iBuyer is called an instant buyer, and it's actually a very popular model that has been done very successfully by companies like OfferPad and Open Door in the US. And basically, what we do is we tell consumers, hey, if you want instant liquidity, we'll charge you a slight fee on the property. But basically, you come to us, you tell us about your property, we do a quick inspection, and you can sell your property as fast as 3 days in full cash, right? And this really kind of disrupts the traditional way of selling the property because before, you need to find an agent, you need to list it, you need to clean out your home, and you need to even show people like the property, right, in person. And obviously during COVID, with all of the restrictions in place, it was very hard for people to do that. So now people have a way to instantly sell their property, get money from it, and then kind of just move on and use the cash as they need. Yeah.
So Philip, based on what you just said, when it comes to this iBuyer business, it seems to differ from what it seemed the actual home-based business was. Was there a product market fit switch, or what happened here? Was this just because of COVID that you guys made a pivot?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I think, just for your viewers and listeners understanding, like what actually Homebase does is, we like fundamentally provide another way for people to be able to buy a home, right? How does it actually work? Actually, basically, if you're a consumer, Kunal, right, if you actually want to buy a house, traditionally you would actually have to go find your own house, and then you go find an agent, and after you find an agent, then you apply for a loan, and then sometimes you'll get your loan decision back, and they might not want to finance, like let's say 90% or 70% or even 50% of your home, or they might just reject you as a whole, and then you have to do a deposit in that kind of process, right? But what we do is quite different, right? So if you're a consumer and you want to work with Homebase, you actually come to us and say, hey, I want to buy this home, but I'm not really sure about my finances because you could be a foreigner, you could be an entrepreneur, right? Maybe you have unstable income. So what we actually do is we actually handhold you through the entire shopping process, right? You actually find any home you want. It could be an apartment, it could be land, it could be a landed property anywhere in Vietnam. And actually, we buy the home for you first, right? So, actually, we buy it for you first. So from day one, you can start, living in it. You can start renting it out if you want. And over time, essentially what we're doing is we pre-agree a buyback price in the future. And this is saying, hey, if you buy it at 100K today and we pre-agree, let's say 150K after 5 years, every single month you just deposit more and more and more towards that buyback price, such that by the end of the contract, you probably have, unlocked, a little bit more kind of equity in your home. And then at that point, you can decide to fully buy it out. Or if you want, you can actually walk away and sell it, anything you want, right? And then you get your money back essentially. So it's actually another way for people to be able to buy a home, right? Touching on your question, like the reason why we actually kind of, decided to do this iBuyer business again is actually just because of customer demand, right? We're as a business, right? It is actually, and as a startup, it's actually very essential that you have to keep on talking to your customers, keep on getting the insights, the feedback on what people want and what directions people want you to do, right? And I think it was very clear to us that during COVID, the appetite for buying real estate really had dried up, right? And people were looking for money to be able to finance, for people to fund their businesses and support their families, right? So kind of the decision to launch this business model, iBuyer, in conjunction with what we do normally, was actually driven by the customer appetite that we saw and kind of the market need, right? And I think we're lucky that, even after COVID and even after things are starting to recover, there's been strong demand for actually, not only the original product that has returned, but also kind of continued support for this iBuyer product. Because again, nothing like that, has been done in Vietnam so far. And I think we're really kind of trying to bring a lot of these services, right, to these more emerging markets.
So when it comes to this aspect of this client walking onto this platform, you walk them through the process, you end up buying the property for them, right? And then they end up paying you back. So the equity versus debt ratio, the equity is increasing, right? Their debt is going down as they slowly pay you back. But what happens hypothetically if something happens in that client's life where they need to extend that? Is there fluidity around these contracts? How do you guys deal with those unknown factors, unknown situations?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And actually, I think it's something that we personally saw a lot of during COVID because there was so much instability and volatility in the market, right? And I think that's actually where Homebase stands out compared to a more traditional solution, like per se a bank, right? In a bank's case, they basically seize your assets, they kick you out of the home, then they evict you essentially, and then you have nowhere else to live. Homebase, actually, we have many different options in terms of the monthly payments, right? So we allow customers to actually choose how much they want to deposit. So there's obviously a monthly minimum amount, but you can actually deposit more than that if you want on your monthly deposit. So actually, in terms of your flexibility in your monthly payments, right? Actually, it could be up to 75% lower than traditional financing options, and that's what makes it a lot more accessible. In addition to kind of qualification factors, but that's what makes it a lot more accessible to a wider range of people, including very young people, right? Who maybe they have unstable income or they don't earn as much every single month, right? And I guess with Homebase, right, at any time, we give you the options to either kind of fully buy out the property, if you find a seller. But if let's say that you really are struggling financially and this is a burden and you really can't do it, it's actually okay, right? And we allow the customer to actually walk away at any single time and cash out the equity that they've accrued in the property. So in that case, we would basically engage a third-party agent, we would sell the property, and then immediately upon the sale, we would actually give you back your proceeds, which is all the deposits that you accrued in the property over time. And yeah, I think part of this, our role, right, is to become like a really kind of reliable partner alongside you, right, in the home ownership process. And we just really want to make that experience so much better than what people have done before.
And as of November of last year, you raised a whopping 30 million US dollars, which is amazing and huge for Southeast Asia because those funds tend to go a very, very long way.
Yeah, I think honestly we're very, very lucky to be backed by some of these really great innovative VCs and companies that really see the potential of this region, right? So for us, we were actually very lucky. I think we were actually the first company from Vietnam to go through YC. So YC, right? So before there was, I think, no other companies from Vietnam that had done the program. And actually people who invested in us and joined the round are people who have seen a lot of these very successful companies, right? So executives from really revolutionary companies like Open Door, like Divvy Homes, that basically do these kind of models in the US, right, and are really innovating on prop tech. And then other really well-established venture funds like Goodwater Capital and Partech, who have invested in a lot of these prop tech innovators as well. Yeah, so I think we're very optimistic about kind of the region, and we're very glad that our partners and investors also kind of see such an amazing growth potential for this as well.
You raised both across equity and debt. Then that's quite unique. What caused you to split it across equity and debt? What was the leading factor behind this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, fundamentally, our mission and at Homebase, what we do is really helping people kind of be able to afford homes, right? And for us, we just thought that it actually makes a lot more sense that we would work with stable capital partners who are billion-dollar like kind of family offices or institutional debt funds, and use that capital for us to be able to buy the underlying assets, right? Instead of just pure equity. Because, for example, we actually have a very lean team relative to a lot of other startups that are our size, I would say. And, we really wanted to kind of use that money for a good purpose, right? And use it for the best purpose, which is actually the buying the assets, right? So in that case, like that makes a little bit more sense than something like equity.
With this amazing raise, what have been some of the biggest milestones you have been able to accomplish since November of 2021? So Philip, speaking of investors, who have been some of your most strategic investors till date?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for us, we're really lucky to be backed by, really, really, amazing and visionary people and funds actually. So for us, we went through YC, actually as for the first Vietnam company to actually go through YC. So before us, I don't think there was anyone else in its history. And I think it was a great experience despite, being remote and stuff. But also, there's been a few like very strategic angel investors and operators who have backed us, including executives and founders and ex CEOs and ex COOs of companies like Divvy Homes, which does rent to own in the U.S. And I think they just raised, at like a $2 or $3 billion valuation, basically. One of the former execs at Open Door actually is one of our investors. Open Door just went public last year, I think under a SPAC. I think they're now worth between like 5 to 10 billion USD. They also do iBuyers as a business, and some really big kind of property platforms and portals, including 99Co and other kind of platforms in Southeast Asia. And I think on the more institutional front, we've had several like pretty kind of strategic VCs as well that have backed us. And those include like Good Water Capital, who also I think backed Open Door, and like Tech Ventures, which is one of the leading funds in Europe as well. In addition to YC and some of the other investors in the region as well. Yeah, and I think for us, yeah, I mean it's something that we're quite lucky because obviously somewhere like Vietnam and Southeast Asia is still such a developing part of the world. But a lot of these investors see the opportunity here because honestly, there hasn't been too many very innovative prop tech companies here, and having that support is really really nice for us as well.
So going off that point, what is it like developing a startup in a low to mid income market like Vietnam? What was the problem that you saw in this market that you were really trying to solve when you initially dived into it?
Our target customers actually are anyone who wants to own a home but cannot because of the traditional limitations of the banking and the financial system, right? These include people like, any foreigner in Vietnam actually cannot qualify for a bank loan because of regulations on the State Bank of Vietnam, right? Or it could be, even a young person who is in their 20s, who is in their 30s, maybe looking to start a family, and they want to be able to buy a home because maybe they're thinking of having kids. Yet, because they don't have enough savings or because their income is volatile, right? Maybe they're an entrepreneur or maybe they, do freelance gigs. The bank actually doesn't accept their income, right? So we're basically being able to make homeownership accessible for all of these groups of people who traditionally then could not be able to buy a home and could not afford a home. Now we're making that dream possible for them.
Hiring in a market such as Vietnam, do you find a difference in the quality of the developers and talent, which you are seeing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think at Homebase, we're really lucky to have a really international and diverse team. For us, we have kind of people who are definitely Vietnamese who have grew up here in the market, who have gone through the education here, and they're really, really great talent. We have people who maybe are ethnically from here, but they've studied overseas. They worked in, Silicon Valley, and then they came here. And then we also have people who are kind of expats, right, who are from places like Silicon Valley or Wall Street and in New York, and came here, came to Southeast Asia because they see such a massive opportunity. I definitely think that hiring is going to be more difficult because the traditional startup environments and the concentration of talent that you see in Silicon Valley just is just geographically located elsewhere, right? But I think we're just very, very encouraged because I think, we see such a dynamic and amazing talent pool here, and it's actually increased in, over time, right? And I think overall we've been able to assemble still a really, really good team, despite, having all of these kind of like hurdles basically in finding talent. Yeah.
Now, changing topic a bit to the more personal side of things, Philip. You are from the US, and do you ever envision yourself going back after this startup? Where do you see this going?
Yeah, that's a really funny question because every single time that I catch up with my friends who are in the US, we have the same conversation about, moving back and where we see ourselves in the next several years. And at least, for me, looking at kind of the world as a whole, I and a lot of my members of my team, we really believe that Southeast Asia is going to be the next nexus of growth for the next decade or so. And historically, if you look at countries like China, that really have gone through this massive transformation financially, digitally over the past decades or so, we see a very similar growth story in Southeast Asia and Vietnam as a whole, right? If you look at the economy of Vietnam, right, it's growing around 6 to 7% every single year consistently for the past 10 years, with the exception of maybe like COVID, but that growth is rebounding even this year, right? If you look at the kind of the GDP growth rate is just insane, right? And I think there was a BCG study that did an analysis on kind of Vietnam's middle class, and basically in the next 5 years, right, by 2030 or so, there'll be around 30 million people moving into the middle class, right? And all of this unlocks a huge need for services, for goods, and it's all this latent kind of pent up demand that's being unleashed over the next decade or so. So yeah, I mean, I think in terms of my own objective, in terms of what we're building at Homebase, right, we really do view that Southeast Asia has such a strong opportunity for growth, and there will be more and more venture deals coming out of here, more and more investment, and more really innovative startups coming out of this part of the world.
So, Philip, to wrap up our call with our last and final question for the day, what piece of advice would you give to people out there from the journey you've had so far in life?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. I think for me, if I look back on my journey over the past, 2 or 3 years, right, the overwhelming lesson I've honestly learned is just take risks and try to, really follow your gut in terms of what you want to do. I think before, if you look at my career, it's a lot more traditional companies and traditional career paths because, growing up, that was what was deemed as the successful one, and the well-trodden one, especially in somewhere like Silicon Valley or Wall Street or those kind of things. But having the kind of the guts to quit your job and then just move and run a startup is a very irrational decision, but it's something that I felt was right. And I think over and over again when we look at, hey, like during COVID, how do we manage to navigate the business, taking all of these calculated risks and just taking that leap of faith has really brought me to do really, really amazing things, right? So I think for your listeners out there who are just kind of considering it or just maybe they're still a little bit hesitant about doing something that they never tried before, I just say go for it, right? And what's the worst thing that can happen, right? You can always go back to your job, you can always find another job, but I think the most important thing is to really capture these opportunities and just take a leap of faith. Yeah.
And Philip, for listeners out there who are interested in touching base with you or potentially catching a cup of coffee with you, what would be the best point of contact?
Yeah, definitely happy to reach out and chat. You can find me on LinkedIn at Phillip An, which I think you can also attach to my profile, Crenell. But if you also want to send me an email, my email is Phillip, Phillip, at gethomebase.com. So feel free to reach out anytime and happy to chat.
Philip, it was a pleasure having you on Geeks of the Valley, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for your time too, Crenell. Appreciate it.
This podcast is brought to you by Python, an Asian-based open source enterprise software company. Python offers a suite of software applications and infrastructure services to scholars and universities.